I remember going to Vermont, speaking at the Martin Luther King Day there about 3 years ago, and the senator was there and was awarded. And it is not a ceremonial award. He has earned the respect of working class and progressive forces all over the world. It is our honor to have him as our opening plenary speaker, the senator from Vermont, the face of American progressive politics, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Reverend Sharpton, thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today. And thank you for all of the work you have done over the years in the fight for justice and time again taking on unpopular and difficult causes. And I want to thank all of you who are in the room today, who in many instances are on the front line every single day, standing up and fighting for what America is supposed to be about. I am the longest serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. And as such, my views of the world are a little bit different than many of my colleagues. And I've also been described as somebody who's kind of blunt and not terribly content with small talk. So let me be blunt with you today. All right, you ready to hear some blunt talk? Our country today faces more serious problems than at any time since the Great Depression. And if you throw in the planetary crisis of climate change, problems may be even more serious. And one of the things that we do not do as a nation, and maybe the most serious crisis of all, is to sit down and discuss the serious crises. So let me lay it on the line for you. Today, this country faces an unemployment crisis. Unemployment is not 5.5%. Real unemployment, including those who have given up looking for work and are working part-time, is 11%. We don't talk about youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is 17%, and African American youth unemployment is off the charts. In America today, here's another word we don't use, 45 million Americans are living in poverty. Almost more people than at any time in the modern history of our country. Today in America, shamefully, we have by far the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. When you talk about quote-unquote family values, you don't have 18% of your children living in poverty. Today in America, in a highly competitive global economy where we need the best educated workforce in the world, college is unaffordable for working class families, and millions of our young people are saddled with horrendous student debt. In America today, not far from here, we have a financial system dominated by a handful of Wall Street firms who drove this country into the worst recession in the modern history of America. And these Wall Street firms have shown themselves to be motivated by greed, by recklessness, and illegal behavior, and enough is enough. In America today, despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, we still have 35 million Americans who have no insurance and many more who are underinsured. The United States remains the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. We've got to change that. In America today, we have far more people in jail than China, a communist authoritarian country 3 times larger than we are. In fact, as you all know, it is projected that unless we change the way we do things in this country, 1 out of 3 black males born today is likely to end up in the criminal justice system sometime in their lives. What a human tragedy that is. Now, as serious as all of those issues are, let me be very blunt with you and tell you what not a whole lot of people will tell you, and that is there is one issue even more serious than all the issues that I've mentioned, and that impacts all of the issues that I have mentioned. And that is income and wealth inequality in America, which has reached grotesque levels. Today, the United States has, by far, the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, and it is worse today. And Mayor de Blasio was talking about it. It is worse today than at any time since the 1920s. The gap between the very, very rich and everyone else is growing wider and wider. And let me give you some statistics to tell you how ugly and obscene this situation is. Today, the top 1% owns about 42% of the entire wealth of the United States, while the bottom 60% owns less than 2%. Today, listen to this, the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today, one family, Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40%. One family. Now, many of my Republican colleagues talk about their fears about wealth distribution. Well, let me tell you about wealth distribution. In the last 30 years, there has been a massive transfer of wealth in America. Problem is, it's gone in the wrong direction. It has gone from the middle class and the working class to the top 1/10 of 1%. I'm talking about trillions of dollars. And what our job is to take that distribution of wealth and start transferring it back to the working families of America. Today, when we talk about income, 99% of all new income generated is going to the top 1%. Is that what America is supposed to be about? Today, you got 25 hedge fund managers who make more income than 425,000 public school teachers. We've got to change that. We've got to change that. We've got to make an America and a government that works for all of our people and not just the top 1/10 of 1%. So what are we going to do? Well, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to create millions of decent paying jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. In New York, in Vermont, all over this country, our roads, bridges, water systems are falling apart. We can create and maintain 13 million jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure and investing $1 trillion over 5 years, and that's what I intend to do. Brothers and sisters, a $7.25 an hour federal minimum wage is a starvation wage. We've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And in my view, that should be $15 an hour over the next few years. Nobody who works 40 hours a week should be living in poverty. We need pay equity for women workers, no more 78 cents on the dollar. We need to change overtime law. If you're working 50 hours a week, you should get time and a half. There is a trade bill coming to the floor of the Senate soon called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In my view, our trade policies, NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China have been a disaster. They've cost us millions of jobs. We need to demand that corporate America invest in America, not in China. Education should be the right of all people, regardless of their income. I'll be introducing legislation in the next 2 weeks to make tuition free for every public college and university in America. In my view, there are some people who say, you know, what we've got to do is regulate Wall Street. Well, let me tell you something. Wall Street regulates Congress. Congress does not regulate Wall Street. When you have 6 financial institutions that have assets equivalent to 60% of our GDP, when they issue 50% of the mortgages and 2/3 of the credit cards in America, you know what Teddy Roosevelt would do? He'd break them up, and that's what we need to do. The Affordable Care Act has done a lot of good things, but not enough. In my view, we need a Medicare for all single-payer system guaranteeing health care to all of our people as a right. Now, in Washington, many of my Republican colleagues, they say, you know, we have a large deficit. Well, they're right. They went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, forgot to pay for those wars. And now having driven up the deficit, their solution is to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education. I say not only should we be protecting and defending Social Security, we've got to expand Social Security benefits. Now, at the end of the day, if we want to deal with income and wealth inequality, what we have to say to the largest corporations in this country who are enjoying record-breaking profits, what we've got to say to the millionaires and billionaires who are doing phenomenally well, we've got to say, welcome back to America. You're going to have to start paying your fair share of taxes. We're losing $100 billion every year because these corporations stash their money in the Cayman Islands and in Bermuda. We need that money back home to create decent paying jobs. We got hedge fund managers on Wall Street who pay an effective tax rate lower than truck drivers and nurses. That's wrong. That has got to change. Now, this country, and let me conclude by saying this, and I think the mayor made that point as well. Over many, many years, this country has faced many struggles. And sometimes we've succeeded and sometimes we haven't. If we were sitting in this room 40 years ago, the Reverend and other people, and somebody would jump up and say, you know, I think that in 2008 we're going to elect an African-American president and he'll get reelected in 2012, that America will have come so far in overcoming racism that that will happen. You know what most people would have said? Not going to happen. But it happened, and we should be proud that it happened. 40 years ago, if we were sitting in this room and somebody said, you know, I think we're going to have women governors and women senators far more than anyone could dream of, people would say, nah, it's not going to happen. We can't overcome sexism. But we did. We still have a long way to go, but we're making progress. And if 20 years ago somebody sat in this room and said, you know what, we're going to treat all people equal in this country regardless of their sexual orientation, people would have said no way. But we've done that as well. We're making progress. But the one area where we're not only not making progress, we're in retreat, is this issue on economics. Tens of millions of working people are working longer hours for lower wages, and the rich are getting much richer. We have a Supreme Court decision which said, Citizens United said, if you are a billionaire, if you're the Koch brothers, you can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the political process, and you can elect candidates who want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And that, to my mind, is a real danger to the foundation of American democracy. You got Republican governors all over this country who are trying to make it harder for people to vote, not easier for people to vote. Voter suppression. And we've got to stop that. So what I urge of people, and it's not an easy fight, that we have got to have the courage to stand up to the billionaire class and say that this country belongs to all of us and not just you. And when we do that, we can create an America that works for us all and not just for a handful. And with that, I thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Senator Bernie Sanders. All right. I'm going to bring on our political panel, and then Ilyana Van Zandt is already in the house. She will immediately after do our panel on police brutality on the impact on the victims. We want you to hear from the victims and the impact on them. Nobody knows how to deal with pain and healing and justice better than Ilyana Van Zandt. And we're so honored she is doing this with the victims today. She's going to be honored also at our women's luncheon this afternoon. Talking about godfathers and godmothers, I neglected to acknowledge the godmother of black politics since we're going into political, our political phase, and that is the president of the City Council of Newark, Mildred Crump. Stand up. That's the godmother. Our panel to my left is the head. Y'all thought I was kidding when I said we have a chapter in Iowa. He is the president of our chapter in Iowa.
Yes, sir, brother.
He pastors in Waterloo.
Hold it down.
And I'm going to his church to kick off our voter rights tour to make Iowa deal with voting rights. The Reverend Dr. France Whitfield. When I first, Robert Gibbs went to Iowa and to Reverend Whitfield's church, I didn't know there were that many blacks in Iowa. But he explained to me it's so cold, they just all stay inside. As I did when I was in Iowa. The mayor of Newark, New Jersey, the one and only Ras Baraka. The mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, who we honored at the Triumph Awards, who was with us when I did the voters tour in his town. He hosted us at our chapter's church there in Columbia, South Carolina, and we are glad to have him with us again, the Honorable Stephen K. Benjamin. the former White House press secretary to President Obama, who made mess look easy. I used to sit up and wait, how is he going to spend that? And he'd get finished, I'd believe it. That senator really wasn't that bad, he just said it wrong. Robert Gibbs, give him a hand. President and CEO of Voto Latino, our sister beloved, our partner in working together. Give a hand, Maria Teresa Kumar. And a real brother, a real soldier, a real fighter. He stands for what he believes. He takes flack. One way you know, Dr. King used to say, if you're effective is if people are always taking shots. But if you're very effective, you can take it. Good champions know how to take the tackle and run with the tackler on their back and still go across the goal line. And that's him, the mayor of Philadelphia, the city of brother love, Michael Nutt. He's hosting the Democratic Convention. I want to start, I'm going to give each of them 4 minutes. That's 5 minus 1. Give us an overview how you feel in 2016 civil rights activists can frame their concerns into the debate on the presidential elections. And that is from both a policy standpoint, but a practical standpoint, given the demographics of the primary states, the timing. How do these young people, these are some of our young people from Huddle, how do our young people that are learning the process, how do some of our adults that have been, or older people that have been frustrated, how do we impact the things like voter rights and like police reform to make them central but feasible issues in the 2016 election? Because when I say feasible, it's because people are not going to represent something or adhere to it or advocate if they think it's going to cost them votes. But we don't want to advocate things that become so watered down and diluted that it doesn't make change. So how do we strike the balance where we're effective? I'm going to start with Mayor Nutter, then Maria, then Robert, and go across the board, 4 minutes each. Mayor Nutter.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for the opportunity to be here. Good morning, National Action Network. You know, I think the first thing is we individually, not only collectively, not in just a group setting, but individually, we have to commit to actually going out to vote in the first place. You have to commit to going out to vote in the first place. Many of you I know have seen the movie Selma. Our folks marched 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. Yet, in many of our communities, including my own city, we struggle to get folks to walk 5 minutes out of their house to go to the polling place, to exercise their franchise. You don't have to know how many bubbles are in the bar of soap. You don't have to know the exact amount of water that's in that container or how many jelly beans are in the water jar. All you have to do is show up, identify yourself, and go in and exercise your franchise. And we disrespect Dr. Martin Luther King and all those who were down there at those times and all those who have struggled further if we don't go out and vote ourselves. Second, let's have a plan. I mean, you know, the fundamentals are, it's about jobs, it's about education, it's about violence in our communities, and especially among young men and boys of color, the things that go on, the tragedy that we saw yesterday on the video, community and policing relations, what President Obama's work on My Brother's Keeper. The issue is, in that work, yes, President Obama started that work, but presidents and other leaders start a lot of things, and then they stay on the agenda and they stay focused. Someone else started Social Security, but I think we've had it for a long time. Somebody else started Medicare, but I think we've had it for a long time. So staying focused on the issue of violence and what's going on in our community has to be on the agenda in the upcoming election, as well as whoever is the next president, that they stay focused on those particular issues. It's about investment, job training, literacy. How do you move people out of poverty? The level of poverty in this country is still a tragedy and much too high in many of our cities all across the nation. And we need a new partnership between local governments and certainly our federal government. Many of us and other mayors I'm sure will agree. We spent a lot of time in the White House with President Obama and his team. The focus that they have on cities, the one form of government that is actually working every day to make things happen. The mayors cannot make speeches about whether or not we picked up your trash. You know whether we did that or not. We cannot make a speech about moving snow or doing the other things that happen. And so that partnership at the local level with the federal government, I think, is critically important as we move forward. But I'm going to come back and I'll conclude with what I started. Vote. Vote like your lives depend on it, because they do. Make a commitment today. Make a commitment to drag 10 people to the polls on Election Day. This is the real deal here. And if we appreciate many of the things that President Obama has put into place, sometimes it's not only about change, it's also about continuing the good things that are in place. We need to be committed to voting every election. It's not always going to be exciting. It's not always going to be a dynamic candidate. I'll start with myself. I'm not the most exciting person around, but every 6 months, someone runs for office and someone wins, and they make decisions that affect your life, your children's lives, and people that we don't even know for generations to come. We must vote. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Reverend, for having Voto Latino here. Thank you for always being at the forefront of civil rights. I want to give an incredible recommendation of applause, because when Sheriff Arpaio came against the Latino community and Janet Brewer signed a racial profiling law, Reverend, you were the first one there. And what you said demonstrated that our communities, there should be no light between the Latino community and the African American community, because there are too many issues that impact us. And together we are incredibly fierce and incredibly strong. I say this because together there are over 91 million Americans right now that are trying to make ends meet between the African and Latino community. 1 in 3 Latinos, 1 in 3 in our incarceration are Latinos in federal prison. For the very first time this year, K through 12, we have more children in poverty than in our country's history. It's also the very first year that is a majority minority, K through 12. When we start talking about what our future holds, they're right now sitting in the classroom waiting for us to make sure that we are not going to let them down. So when we start talking about what do we need for the 2016 election, let's be clear. It cannot happen on our watch that we keep our children behind. It cannot happen on our watch that we continue mass incarceration. It cannot happen on our watch, the idea that we are separating mother and child because we do not have immigration reform because of a lack of will. And we cannot happen on our watch when we stop having to talk about the idea of equality. We have to make sure that we are presenting every single step of the way that we're talking about equity. We don't want just minimum wage, we want a living wage. We don't want to make sure that our children are basically going from school to prison pipeline. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the same opportunity that generations before us had. That's all we want. We want a fair shot. So when we are starting to have these conversations with the next presidential nominees, let them be clear that we're keeping watch. When we're talking about the Voting Rights Act, the Shelby County versus Eric Holder, that wasn't by coincidence. That was the 5th largest county of Hispanic growth, over 200% since the 2000 census. That's right. 200%. So let's be clear of who they're trying to prevent from the polls. It's our brothers and sisters. And it's up to us to define America's future. And they will be able to find our opportunity if we define it for ourselves. And we have to make sure that we include the responsibility of men and women when we talk about paid family leave. Not just the women, but we have plenty of brothers out there that also are holding the water and making sure that they're carrying it for us, and we have to do it in unity. So let's be honest, let's be fair, but let's also hold those folks accountable. Because together, with the Latino community, the African American community, the Bernie Sanders of the world, no one can stop us. But we are living in a defining moment. Because unless we start talking about equity and perfect participation at the polls, we're going to look more like apartheid South Africa of 20 years ago, and not at the possibility of the future that our forefathers aspired to when they wrote that piece of paper. So what we need to do is hit the ground running, knock on those doors, but let's be clear of what we're looking for. Equity, possibility, and opportunity for those kindergartners that just joined us in the ranks today.
Thank you, Reverend, for inviting us here and for your message of hope and empowerment. What I want to do in my 4 minutes is underscore some of the remarks that you've already heard. I think one of the most important things that was said was when Mayor de Blasio said, "Do not let your hope be replaced by despair." I've got an interesting story, and I loved when Reverend Sharpton talked about walking across that Edmund Pettus Bridge a few weeks ago in the anniversary. I grew up in Alabama. My mother was from not far from here in Brooklyn, and my father was from North Carolina, and I got to work long enough in politics to have lived and been raised in Alabama and help elect this country's first black president. And I remember when I was first starting out working, I worked for a congressman who was a political science professor, and at one point, I was one of the jobs I did was driving him around the district, so it got me a chance to talk to him for a long period of time and ask questions, and I was curious, and he was great to talk to. And one time I asked him, I was trying to rationalize all these things, and I said, you know, why is it that every time something happens in Alabama, we seem to make the bad decision? Why when the door of education gets wider, do we see someone standing in that door? Why is the video of the dogs and the water hoses, why is that from Birmingham? And he said something that I won't forget. He said, you know, nobody's perfect, but when you look at the history of the United States and you look at the history of a place like Alabama, every time it got up to making that important decision, almost every single time it picked the wrong path. And though the United States never started perfect and isn't perfect to this day, that when you get to that point where it has to make that decision, more times than not, it picks the right path. But understand this, it doesn't pick the right path purely by luck or coincidence. It picks it because there are people that push in that direction, that make it possible to choose the right path. I think we have all lived through a tumultuous political and economic time in our lives, and you've heard many of the statistics. Walking into that White House in early 2009 and watching the jobs reports come in, losing 750, 850, 950,000 jobs a month. Things have gotten better, but in 2016, let us resolve not to settle for it just having gotten a little bit better, right? And I want to really underscore what Mayor Nutter said. There are vested special interests that hope all of you are busy that first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of an even-numbered year. They hope you oversleep. They hope you want to catch up on something on television. Maybe you want to watch Empire again. They want you to be busy. They hope you're busy. They want you to come on Wednesday or Thursday. We have an obligation in understanding that when Dr. King, as has been said, was killed, he was fighting for not just civil rights, but economic rights. He was fighting for good jobs and good wages and better working conditions. And it is easy to get frustrated and to get down and to have that despair that Mayor de Blasio was talking about. We've talked about that movie Selma, but a few years ago, did you see the movie Lincoln? Great. I saw it the Friday after the 2012 race. So I was happy. And I thought, I'm going in to see this movie, and it's going to be this great movie, this push for emancipation. And halfway through the movie, I realized to get some of these people to do the right thing, they're trading jobs at the post office and, getting somebody else help. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. This isn't like, where's the music and where's the big speeches and where's the do the right thing? It isn't always easy. And in Washington, it's sometimes like that. You see the sausage being made. But we can't let that be our story. And it can't be the story in 2016. I want to leave you with one statistic because I want you to understand that it's not going to be easy. In 2008, in the Obama campaign, everyone said it was a landslide. You know what we got? We have 53% of the vote. Okay? That was a landslide. In the last 63 years in this country, one time has a political party served 8 years in the White House and won the next election.
Right.
One time since Dwight D. Eisenhower was the President of the United States of America. One time. So if you think this is going to be easy,
Right.
if you've got something else you've got to do that day, it's time to rearrange your priority list. Because all the things that have been fought for, health care, financial reform, education, all the things that have been fought for are all at stake one more time. So don't be busy. Lord knows, don't be late. You only get one good chance, and we've got to break one time in 63 to make a real difference in 2016. Thank you for letting me be here.
Rev, I'll stay within my 4 minutes. Every time, people think because you're a politician, you like to give big speeches. Every time I get to speak, I think of the first time I spoke at my home church, St. John Baptist Church in Columbia, South Carolina. Well, I was done, a little guy came up to me. He said, "I grew up, I'm going to give you some money." I said, "Well, thank you, son, but why?" He said, "Because my daddy said you're one of the poorest speakers we ever had," right? So, I'm going to get up and speak when I actually have something to say. And first of all, to be able to go back home and tell my wife, who is a very substantive and serious woman, she's about to start her second term as a chief criminal judge in Columbia, South Carolina. But to tell her that Robert Gibbs opened up his comments talking about Cookie Lion is going to be entertaining for her, to say the least. The reality, and Mayor Nutter, who's been a fierce leader for mayors and leaders all across this country, fighting as a mayor. Things can get locked up in Washington, D.C., or in Columbia, or Raleigh, or in state capitals around the country, but mayors have to get the job done. 90% of America's gross domestic product is produced in cities and metropolitan economies all across this country. So we have to get the job done. If we don't, America is not competitive. America cannot be competitive if justice is absent from the streets in America. In Columbia, we've taken our job very seriously. We finished 5 of our last budget years with a budget surplus. We've invested in public safety. We've invested in good, strong policy changes. When I see this man travel the country, he comes to Columbia, he goes all around the country, he's talking to us about turning anger into action. We're frustrated. People are angry. People are angry all across America. And I will tell you that the difference between what we saw yesterday in Walter Scott and Eric Garner and some of the other major challenges the Bell family and the Martin family are seeing is that these things are caught on video. I'm happy that North Charleston stepped up and did the right thing and did it quickly, but quite frankly, they had no choice. We all saw what happened in North Charleston. And when we see what happens, then all of the country steps up and says something has to be done. Simple policy changes. Every officer in America ought to be wearing a lapel camera right now. Every single one. That's a policy change. That's a substantive and sustainable policy change. And that's one of many that we ought to be advocating for anyone who wants to be the leader of the free world. The President of the United States, the leader of the most advanced and developed democratic nation in the history of the world, the land of milk and honey, ought to be able to submit to some very basic policy changes that will help improve the lot for each and every one of us across this country. In Colombia, we adopted a policy called Justice for All. We determined that every single officer by the end of this year will have a lapel camera. Every single interview of a violent crime suspect will be videotaped. There will be no coercion of witnesses in Colombia and South Carolina. Our internal affairs review process, one of the most secretive processes in America, will have a civilian on that panel reviewing everything that happens. Every single use of force report, every single internal affairs report will be published. At the end, we'll have our first publishing of it in 2 weeks. The complaint, who it was against, and the disposition of that complaint will be made public. Transparency. Transparency, when there's an absence of trust, you have to have transparency evident in this process. Substantive policy changes that allow us to go from anger to action. Just as Rev has been advocating all across this country. I couldn't agree more with all of my colleagues and every speaker who's been up here that while the relationship between the African American community and law enforcement is incredibly tense, it is representative, I believe, of a significant level of distrust that exists between the American people and our governments. It's just real. Whether it's been a very tangible instances of problems, or if it's just been exacerbated by oftentimes by media that focuses on the things that ought not be focused on, and sometimes and often gets them wrong. But it's real. So how do we deal with it? I think we do that by demanding of our people, of folks who want to be our elected officials, particularly those that want to serve in the highest offices in the land, to actually commit to some real substantive policy changes. In Colombia, we've committed that every single person who works for the city of Columbia will be paid 10-10. 10-10, we believe should be a national minimum wage. You can't have Ted Cruz going on talking about income inequality and fighting for poor folks and be against the minimum wage that gives people a chance to work. Every year I get out in our community. Met a great woman named Shakea McCoy earlier this year, a stay-at-home mother of three. Her husband goes out and works hard every single day to provide for their family, but they can't make ends meet. So Shakea McCoy did what politicians tell her to do every single day, what Scott Walker and Rand Paul told her to do. She went out and got a job. And after she got a job, she realized that on the wages that she was working, that she couldn't afford child care. So because she was at home with her kids, she couldn't afford to make ends meet. And now because she's out working, she can't afford child care. Something's fundamentally wrong. We're in South Carolina, just like everywhere else across this country. Folks who are in the top 10%, families make $725,000 a year, and those who are in the bottom 90% barely make $35,000 a year. When you're in the top 10%, you make 20 times what the average family makes. Something's wrong, and we need to have strong substantive policy changes. And I believe that the policymakers, the real leaders who respond to those issues, will be the ones who get us to come out and vote for them next year. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be across the water in New York City, here at the National Action Network Convention with the Honorable Reverend Al Sharpton here, who has been a stalwart in our community for many, many years, standing in the gap when other people have run and hid. So we are happy that you're still doing what you're doing. I'm glad to be here.
Amen.
There are a few pieces. One, I just want to reiterate what everyone said about voter turnout. That is very important. In the pre-Obama years, the voter turnout has been an average of about 10% in our community. When President Obama began running, our voter turnout increased to about 13, 14%. In the off election, it dipped back down to about 11% again. In the pre-Obama years, about 89% of the African-American vote went to the Democratic Party, went to that election. When Obama ran, it went up to about 94, 96%. In the off election, it went down again. So, and that is the same even for Latino voters as well. So there are people who are counting on that dip to happen once again. For us not to be engaged, for us not to be encouraged, for us to vote based on an event and not based on our lives, for us to vote based on the hype and not us voting based on what we believe. So it's important that we continue to get people out to vote, to register more people to vote, and kind of increase our voter levels, but at least maintain them and not allow it to dip the way it's been dipping, because we have to keep ourselves relevant, that's for sure, because any opportunity to make us irrelevant will happen, right? Anything that they could do to make sure that our issues are not heard will always happen. So I say we should do what Kwame Ture used to talk about, or Stokely Carmichael. We have to be organized, right? If you're not in an organization in this room, then you're a part of the problem. So you have to be a part of a organization. Stokely Carmichael would say that every time I heard the man speak, Rev, he say, organize, organize, organize. If you're not a part of an organization, then you're a part of the problem. So if I asked everybody to raise their hand to say which organization you're a part of, most people wouldn't be able to do it. There are a lot of people here supporting the National Action Network, but how many of you belong to the organization, the National Action Network, right? So we need you to fill out a membership card and get involved. And if there's no organization you want to be involved in, create your own organization. You have to be organized. We can't scream about the Tea Party when we are not organized, right? We can't scream about the conservatives that are pushing us further and further to the right, that would rather shut down Homeland Security than allow immigrants to come into the United States. That would rather, instead of tax the wealthiest Americans, they would rather take all the agents from the IRS and put them on the borders to stop immigrants from coming into the United States. This is the kind of backwards mentality that these people have. And like was said, instead of raising the minimum wage for most Americans, they would rather have us starve and be unequal in this country over and over and over again. We have to organize. There's no other way around it. We could pray about it, we could talk about it, we could come to these conventions, but we have to organize. And if you belong to a church that's not involved, that's not organized, then you have to tell the pastor that they have to get organized to find a new church. That's important, right? What my colleague, Mayor Benjamin, talked about, the cities being where the GDP is created, where the nation is now trending back to the cities. One important thing that we have to remember is the large portion of black and brown people still reside in these cities because we came here looking for economic freedom and found that the streets were not paved with gold. In fact, that they paid you minimum wage so you could pave them with gold for other people. So we are in these cities, so when you invest in these cities, you begin to invest in black and brown people. There's not a coincidence that people are not investing in these cities. They have to begin investing in these cities to make it possible not only for black and brown people to begin to excel in this country, but in order for the country to excel, period, they have to invest in the cities, which means they have to invest in black and brown people. God is good, right? So America's destiny is tied to the least of its members. America's exceptionalism is tied to black and brown people. And I want to end on this. American exceptionalism, this country on a hill, there's nothing really exceptional about America except the people who have made it exceptional by struggling for democracy since its inception. In 1776, when America, in the middle of the Revolution, declared independence, there were millions of people that were slaves. here. And it was those ex-slaves that fought for democracy, that are still fighting for democracy, the immigrants who came that fought for inclusion, the women who fought for inclusion, the least of us who fought for democracy is what makes America exceptional. Those people, without the history of working and struggling people in this country, there would be nothing exceptional about America at all. So that being said, in order to affect what's happening in this next presidential election, we have to be organized. We have to be organized, and not just organized by the Democratic Party. We have to be organized by ourselves and then push the Democratic Party to become further and further and further more progressive to represent our people. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is certainly an honor to be here today on this great esteemed panel to our president and NAN founder, Reverend Sharpton. I want to thank him personally for the invitation to come and to be here on today. I want to say that, yes, there are Negroes in Iowa. Matter of fact, we have over 100,000 of them. And we have at least 3 soul food restaurants. I was packing my suitcase for the trip, and I was rushing and forgot one of my suits to bring, and I was going to ask Reverend Sharpton if I could borrow one of his. But his suits are a little too big for me, so I wouldn't be able to. I'm not a politician like the other guests on the stage. I'm just a Baptist preacher from Iowa. So my answers are kind of simple today. 3 things. The first thing from a Iowa perspective, and just people in general, is that in regards to our politicians in this upcoming presidential election, the people in general, we have to be clear on what we want and expect. A lot of times, especially in Iowa, we need our candidates to be grassroots. And a lot of times our candidates will come to Iowa and they will tell us what they want to do, but yet they don't want to hear what we need and what we want. And that doesn't always work. So we as a people, we have to be clear on the issues that we want. We have to hold our politicians accountable because they work for us. We put them in office, so they work for us. The second thing is that although we as a people, we may have differences, we can still have agreement. We aren't always going to agree and get along in regards to certain issues, but at the end of the day, we should always come to an agreement because the fact is that we need each other. The candidates, the politicians, they need us and we need them. They work for us. And so we may not get along, we may not agree all the time, but at the end of the day, we have to be in agreement. And then the last thing is as Reverend Sharpton stated, we thank God for these young people. I want to give these young people another hand today. One of the most important things that we need to do is we need to hear from our young people. And we need to listen to their thoughts, and we need to implement their thoughts. Reverend Sharpton did a interview with the Washington Post a while back, and in his article he was stating how people were talking about Reverend Sharpton is the only one doing what he does. And the question arose, who else can do his job? There's only one Al Sharpton. No, there's no one else, I believe, that is competent enough to do the work that Reverend Sharpton does. A lot of people, all they see is what's on Politics Nation. All they see is what's on TV, but we don't know what Reverend Sharpton has to do when he has to go home at night and get in the bed, and he has to take all of our phone calls about our problems. He has to take those things home. So we have to hear our young people because they represent us. Amen. The young people, they represent us. And if you poll a lot of the young people around this country, a lot of the older people and the adults, they know Reverend Sharpton. But if you ask the young people who Reverend Sharpton is, a lot of them don't know who he is. And it's not their fault, it's our fault for not getting the information and the news out. So we have to listen to our young people. So thank you so much.
Give our panel a hand. Before they step down, I see Dwight McKee, who has been with us from the beginning, my best friend. Many people ask him, did I really start preaching, Gibbs, when I was 4? And unless you come out of the Pentecostal church, that sounds exaggerated. But I did start my first sermon when I was 4, went on the road in Mahalia Jackson when I was 9. I was at Reverend Bartley's church Sunday before last, preaching for his anniversary. Reverend Stephen Bartley is one of the most outstanding activist leaders, preachers in the country. And they put a young boy up to speak that I had to fight back the tears because it reminded me of when I was 4. And I know that they wanted him to say something while the next panel comes on. But I want him to come now because you got 3 mayors up here. I want you to go on the road like I did. He's 6 years old. So I want these mayors His name is Tanner Gray. He's 6 years old. I used to have to stand on a crate to preach for Bishop Washington. And I want Tanner to give a statement. Now, the young folk are here. He younger than y'all. Y'all call me old school. I want you to call them old school. Old Ashley and them over there. But let's hear a few minutes from 6-year-old. Somebody's going to be another Al Sharpton. There's going to be another Tanner Gray. Give a hand to this young man. Tanner.
To protect and serve is what you are hired to do. Not every time I turn on my TV, it's us versus you. Innocent people against the boys in blue. When I grew up, I wanted to be just like you. But now I think not. You are gang members dressed up as cops. Our parents are burying their children day after day, hour after hour, and every second on the clock. I am yelling and screaming, when will these killings stop? How many more lives will it take to arrest these crooked cops? I am Eric Gardner, Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, and Sean Bell. I am all the innocent people that has been killed or innocently thrown in jail. I am the future. There will be no more left. If you continue to kill us and choke us off our last breath, I am the future, and I refuse to be quiet or be still. I am Dr. Martin Luther King. I have a dream. I can and I will.
Give him a big hand. That's his mama right there.